Okay, hello everyone. I'm happy to welcome you to today's NFDI Tool Talk. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ilona Lang, who will speak today about the research data management platform Cosine. Ilona Lang studied at the University of Münster, where she got her PhD in neuroscience. Later, she worked at the University of Constance in the area of research data management and open science before she moved on to the IT center of the RWTH Aachen, where she is now the group lead and service manager for the Cosine platform. I'm very happy to learn more about Cosine, the collaborative scientific integration environment. The platform for storage management and archiving research data is developed in Ilona Lang's department and in part co-financed by the NFDI consortia, NFDI for Inc. and Matwerk. The service is open to use for the NFDI community. It's my pleasure to hand over to Ilona Lang now.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you can hear me all good, and I'm very happy to present to you our platform today. I will first give you some information why we developed Cosine, what the use cases are, which you can use Cosine for. Then I will give you an insight into Cosine, so show you a demonstration, how you can interact with the platform, what the different levels are. And then we will look more closely at the FAIR principles and how Cosine is supporting you and researchers in fulfilling the FAIR principles, and also looking at RDM standards, which the platform is based on. So to begin with, what was our motivation? So we have like two different perspectives, of course, on Cosine. So we have the perspectives of users, which are mainly researchers from NRW right now. And their main need is storage space. And that's what we can give to them via Cosine. So you can access storage space, for example, the research data storage. And there are no costs for it for researchers, but which you will see later on, they have to fulfill research data management standards to get the storage space. And then there's, of course, also the fulfillment of funding requirements the researchers have nowadays. So research data management is very often also part of applications for funding. And the third thing is that, of course, after related also to the good scientific practice, research data has to be archived at least for 10 years. And that's also what we guarantee with Cosine. The main reason for development from university and also from the NFDI perspective is, of course, to fulfill the requirements for research data management. And especially metadata management can be mentioned here for Cosine. And so Cosine ensures that the good scientific practice, which is part of many higher education acts, is fulfilled. And basically here, the FAIR principles have to be named. And the problem before Cosine, from our perspective, was that fair handling of research data is not part of a daily routine for researchers. So beforehand, or nowadays, very often FAIR principles are first followed when data is published. So then, if at all, metadata is thought about and the researchers get in contact with what metadata are and what you need them for. And during the whole phase of a project, the valuable metadata information gets lost because, first at the end of the project, they start thinking about it. So our solution is a data storage and linking environment that implements these kind of FAIR principles from the very beginning of the project start for data sources. And where's the money coming from? Where our funding is based on first the Ministerium für Kultur und Wissenschaft des Landes NRW, but also at the beginning from the excellent funding, university funding of the RWTH. We are funded by the NFD Matwerk and NFD for Inc. And we're also happy to be part of the Applying Interoperable Metadata Standards project, which you will also see some results later on in my talk. And since it's public money, we also have open source platform So this open source code, so that everyone can, what we develop there can be used afterwards. If we look at use cases and the research data lifecycle, I simply want to present here when during a project lifecycle, users can come to us and use Cosine. And of course, we try to have parts in every project step for the users. At the beginning, at the planning phase, it's very important from our perspective to directly think also about metadata. And to get research data storage space, you need to think about metadata and apply for it and mention there what kind of metadata you will use during your project phase. And in Cosine, you can directly invite all the project members you have. So they can be invited via the org ID or via SSO. During the production and analysis phase, you can upload and download your data, give access to everyone who's part of the project. And you can also do that in an automatic fashion. So we have also a REST API so that you can not only interact with via the browser, but also do your automatically workflows. When it comes to the end of the project, we have the archiving possibility, which is, for example, for the research data storage, we guarantee 10 years of storaging. And the metadata will always be stored for 10 years after the project ends. Then on the access level, you get PIDs for your project and for your resources. And via the PIDs, external people outside of your project can ask for access to the data and contact the project owners. And you can always invite externals to your project and give them access to the data. When it comes to reusing, you can find your data and your metadata via an internal metadata search function, which I will also show you in the demonstration phase. To get a more structural view on Cosine, I try to explain that more with this kind of graphic. So as I mentioned, everything starts grouped around a research project. So this is also the beginning. You create your project and you invite all the people who are part of the project to it. And you can give them also different kind of roles based on their position in the project. And then on the left-hand side in this graph, you see that you can add different kind of resources to this research project. And these resources are basically the areas where your data is lying. So your data is not stored in Cosine, but it's still in the resource you're adding to Cosine. And this can be, for example, the research data storage, or it can be GitLab. And you can also add data that is not lying anywhere that can be added to Cosine directly, but where you can simply give a link, so link data. And we are currently also working on adding cloud solutions to Cosine so that we, for example, add Skibo or Nextcloud to the possible access points for your research project. So when you added all the resources you need, you also, and this is what Cosine makes special, you add the metadata around it. So we create this circle of metadata around your project data. And this is what all the resources on the left-hand side makes it fair. So you can create individual metadata profiles and make it in a project-specific way. And these metadata profiles are automatically then linked to your research data. Like I mentioned, we have this left-hand side, and there right now we have the research data storage, which is a consortium object storage system where, for example, also people from the NFDI can apply for storage. And then we have linked data, where you can add externally stored research data to your project. And right now we have GitLab. So if you have a GitLab instance at your university, you can also add your repositories from GitLab. to your Cosine project. So now I want to show you how Cosine looks from the inside. And if you want to sign in, you can go via our homepage and simply hit on sign in. And then you will land on our login page. And here you can choose between different options. Since I am coming from the RWTH Aachen University, I will choose to move there via Aachen University, but you can also use your org ID to log into Cosine. Then you will be redirected to it. And the first thing you're landing on is usually your home area. So here you see all the projects you are part of. And what we always recommend is to first look at your user profile, especially when you log in with your org ID for the first time, because then it's very important to give us your personal information, because we need at least your email address to interact with you. What you also see on this page, on your user profile page, that you can create an access token. So if you don't want to interact with Cosine via the web browser, but only via our API, you can create a token here and use it from there on. You have user preferences, which you can choose. And what we highly recommend, if you are part of a participating university, that you can connect your accounts with your org ID and single sign-on, so that you can use both ways to log in and always land on the same homepage. If I now move into a project, you now see the project landing page. And what I first will show you are the metadata, the first level of metadata we're collecting. And these are the informations you have to fill out when you set up a project. You see here we need a project name and a display name. So this can be a shorter form of the project name. We need a project description. And then on the project metadata level, you can name all the principal investigators. You have the chance to say, okay, when the project ends and when the project starts. So this is of course also information, important information for the duration of the project. And then we have the discipline this project is part of. You can name multiple participating organizations, give project keywords, and choose whether the metadata you are adding in your project is public or only visible for project members. And here it is important to highlight that this is really only about the metadata. So Cosine right now is not an open science platform saying that all the data you add to a project is always only accessible inside this project. So right now, this is of course also a feature request in the long run, but right now you cannot share project data with people who are not part of the project. And what you can do is say that people from outside can find my metadata or my project data, so that they see, oh, there is something interesting, and then they can contact you via the PID. And also on the project settings level, you have the possibility to look at your user management. And here you can add different users. So you can add them either via email address, or if the person's already part in Cosine, you can find the person here. And you can choose what kind of role the person has in your project. You can choose between 3 different roles. Owner have access on all the project settings. Members have only access on the resource settings. And guests have only read-only rights. If I go back to the project page, what you also see is that we have the possibility to create sub-projects. So you can also create a tree of different projects, and each project is a whole project of its own. So each project has its own settings and also its own member management. So if like you have a big project from the SFB or something, you can create also sub-projects for different kind of parts of the big project. And then if you go on the second level of metadata in Cosine, you have the resources, like I already said. And here I will show you how to add a new resource. The first thing you have to choose is the resource type. So we have, like I said, different kind of resource types. We have storage space resource types, which is the RDS, linked data, and GitLab. And for example, NFDI projects or projects with an NFDI relation can apply for the NRW storage space. Then first you choose how much quota you need. And then comes the second level of metadata where you give informations about this kind of resource. So again, you need a resource name, a short description. And like you see, it's also mandatory to give these kind of informations. You have to name a discipline. This is automatically taken from the project level, but can also be deleted and choose. It can also be chosen another one. Again, you can give keywords. And again, you can choose whether the metadata of this resource is public or only project specific. So even if your project is public, the metadata, you can choose for single resources not to be public. And then you can give a license, which we of course recommend, but it's also not mandatory. And these are information for all the project members because you can be part of a project and you need information what you can do with the data. So we highly recommend to name also a license here. And then you can also give some internal rules for reuse. For example, if there are people of industry, part of the project, or the data from the industry, you can directly say here, okay, this data is only meant to be for people from the project and from Siemens, for example. And then comes the third layer of metadata, which is the metadata, the specific metadata for your files. And the discipline-specific metadata, you can say. And here you can choose between different kind of application profiles. For example, coming from a very engineering science university, we have Meta, which is from the engineering science, a metadata schema. And now you can kind of make this profile suitable for your needs. So of course we have mandatory files. So there you can only choose to, for example, say it's always me who's the contact person. And then you can fix this value and say, okay, for every file I will upload in this resource, this is a person who's a contact person. I can also say I don't want to see it every time on the side from my file, so I can hide this information, but it's still added to the file, so as an information. You cannot hide mandatory fields, so these will always, if you haven't entered anything, you cannot hide them. If you enter something and make a fixed value, then you can do that. So if you then say like, okay, fixed, then you can hide it. But there are, of course, also a lot of fields here which you maybe don't need or which are not suitable for your file, so you can also hide them. Or, of course, you can also say here, this is always component XYZ and fix it. And when you're happy with the things you have been adding, you can then say next, come to the creation step. Or you say, okay, this profile is not really perfect. I need, for example, more terms. Then you have the chance to click on create. And then you will be redirected to the application profile generator, which is coming from the project aims. And here you now have the chance to manipulate or copy your profile that you need or create a whole new profile from scratch. And the special thing here is that you don't need RDF or Shackle knowledge to do that, but in behind it will be automatically be a profile which can be validated with Shackle. So what you see here, you can switch between code and between the view you have on it, so the terms, and you can now, for example, choose to copy it or to say, I want to create a new version of it. And then you can add new files to it, new terms, for example. So like I want to add a custom term, or you can choose in our database, which is now coming from the NFDI for terms that you need. For example, you need this term temperature, and then you can choose to add that to the profile. Here, you can see that here below. And you can then also look on the view, how it will look at the end in Cosine. And when you're happy with your creation, you can then send it to our GitLab repository to submit the code. And then there will be a technical validation process on our side. And then afterwards, this will be in Cosine available for your resource creation. But that's also why I say it's important to do that during the planning of a project phase, because it takes, of course, 1 or 2 weeks until it's live on Cosine. So that's why it's important to plan your metadata beforehand. However, if I'm happy with the profile I've been chosen before, I am then redirected to an overview page over my resource settings, and then I can press confirm, and the resource is created. And now I will show you, of course, where the data is really lying. So if I look into a resource, here you see then the single files that have been uploaded to this kind of resource. You can, on the side, you see the metadata profile, which had to be filled out before uploading the data. And what's also here on the information button, you see all the informations to this resource, and you also see the PID. But more easier if you want to look at the persistent identifier and contact person or hand that out, you can simply also on the resource settings click on copy, and then if you paste that into your browser, you will get via handle, for example, you will be redirected to the PID information page, and there you can contact the project owner. That would be the first side, what I want to show you in Cosine. And now back to the talk. So why is Cosine fair? I will give you there just a few insights now. So like you have already seen, we try to be very accessible, so you can log in across institutional borders. You have the possibility to, on the authentication level, you can name an owner of the data, you can name contributors for each data set, and you can set user-specific rights. Then regarding findability, interoperability, and reusability, we have, of course, the metadata, and this is added on 3 levels. So we have this project level, the resource level, and then the file level. So, and all this metadata is then automatically linked with the research data that you upload in your resource. And then when it comes to metadata, what's happening in behind is that everything is, on a technical representation level is done via RDF and Shackle. And the RDF triples include PIDs that lead to described data. And then also there's a search function, so you can type anything in on the search area, and then you will see different kind of resources, project, and files that have this kind of term inside them. And like you see, we have the application profile generator by AIMS, which makes it very easy for users that are not used to interact with RDF and Shackle or write codes there to still create profiles that are good on the FAIR principle side. And we have a repository open for reuse. So every profile that is created can also be afterwards reused. And then we have different kind of protocols. You can access Cosine via the browser, of course, but also via the REST API. And regarding on the resource you're using, you have also the possibility to interact via an S3 protocol with your data. And we have persistent identifiers for each resource. And these include data and metadata. And you can also point to using fragment PIDs to address individual files by extending the handle URL. So at the end of my talk, I want to quickly dive into the RDM standards we are using and behind. So what's really happening on the FAIR level. And there we focus mainly on creating fair digital objects. So to have this semantic interoperability, we have the W3C conforming data types standards. So we have an access control with JSON web tokens. We have a linked data profile, a linked data metadata according to DCAT. And thereby we have a hierarchy of catalogs, which are projects and resources in our cases, and data sets, which are the bit sequences and metadata or metadata. And all of that is in a hierarchical discovery possible via linked data platform. And the relation between data and metadata, so the bit sequences and the metadata, is ensured via fair data points. And as I already mentioned, we have this domain-specific metadata validated via Shackle application profiles. Looking on the long-term interoperability, we are currently working on Cosine kernel information record, so that also the PID includes a small set of generic metadata. So if you look at the PID, that you get more information than only the contact page. And we have these different interfaces and operations, like I also already showed you, to make the whole fair digital object complete. And the PID record links to data and rich metadata. And to have that more on a graphical view, you see here we have per resource, we have this kind of fair digital object created. So we have always in the center, we have the bit sequence. Then there comes the metadata via the application profiles, then the different Cosine interfaces, and the persistent identifier around it. And here are some examples regarding, depending on the resource type you're using. So for example, if you use a GitLab resource, you have the code inside and you have the metadata around it. You can interact with Cosine via the browser and get your persistent identifier. And via this, all of your project data is packed into fair digital objects that are also interoperable. And why are we doing all this? To focus also on W3C standards. That's of course that we don't want to create another data silo with Cosine. So via the development of a metadata hub for NFDI and these fair digital objects, we also want to have the possibility to interconnect national and international data management tools on the long run with Cosine, so that it's always possible to interact have access to the Cosine metadata and data also from other platforms. So that would be it for my talk for now. I'm very looking forward to your questions for Cosine, and hope you got some insights into the platform. And here you also see see important links to our homepage. We have a broad documentation also on the API level. If you have there more questions, I can highly recommend you to look into that. And we have a mailing list if you want to have get more information on the long run regarding Cosine. We give there a monthly update about the new developments. So Cosine is always there's a lot of development going on, and if you're interested in that, please feel free to be added to the mailing list.
Thank you very much for this nice and informative talk about the Cosine service. I stop the stream now, which gives everybody a brief minute to think about the questions, and then we start the discussion.